else have a topic they want to talk about?
I have one that I think I'm on maybe the less popular side. I think an ETF would be awesome for this industry. Talking Bitcoin specifically, but of course, an ETF for any asset that you are behind in the crypto space, I think is just a great financial instrument. So I'm kind of curious. This is a pretty diverse panel. I'm curious everyone else's opinion on that because I know it's could be seen as controversial in this space.
I think it'd be fantastic, and it's inevitable, but it's probably going to take several years. And I actually think once Coinbase IPOs, that's going to be seen as a proxy ETF long before the actual ETF happens.
Well, MicroStrategy is a proxy ETF now, so I think that we're going to get more proxy ETFs. But I do think that it would be valuable to have a real ETF, right? So that it is a pure play, and you don't have to worry about management and whatnot. So I think that it's really it speaks to the SEC, right? Like the SEC should have approved an ETF already. And the fact that one has not been approved already makes me concerned that the decision is not so much on the fundamentals as it is on the politics of it. And I don't think our financial markets and that our investors should be, dealt politics rather than good public policy. And so I think that needs to change. And I don't really have a problem with the centralization of an ETF. I don't even think it would be that good or that popular of a product, to be honest. I think that there's already GBTC. So I think that would just accrue more value and continue to take in more coins. And so like that centralization argument doesn't even make sense because let's look back to what happened in 2017, right? Like Barry Silbert was behind the New York Agreement, behind SegWit2x, and that didn't happen. And yet he had a bunch of coin with GBTC, right? So maybe he could have tried to move the market in one direction or another. It didn't happen because it's a well-regulated product. And I don't think that the fears around it are well-founded. The problem is that you don't have the seizure resistance as you do with your own private keys, right? But I think everyone's aware of that, or I hope so. And that, people are trying to make a reasoned decision about, I don't trust myself to hold my own keys. I've heard people say that, right? And that's a perfectly legitimate perspective to have. And they should have access to a good product of this ETF. Or they have money locked up in some kind of retirement account. Oh, my light just went out. That would, make that very convenient to have an ETF.
Many of the owners and buyers of the ETF would be the institutions that can't hold their own keys. They are, by their bylaws, required to use some kind of instrument like that.
Yeah, and it's like you look at the GBTC premium, like that is institutional or qualified investors being subsidized by retail investors, right? And to me, like the SEC is failing retail investors by making them pay the premium on GBTC instead of having a real ETF product.
The reason the SEC has... Go ahead.
Just it's a gift. I mean, it's $5 billion that's now in GBTC, rotating every 6 months, 20% return on Bitcoin every 6 months. I mean, it's a great handout that only lasts as long as there's no legit retail ETF product.
The reason the SEC hasn't approved an ETF, I think Occam's razor answer is simply career risk for those politicians. For them to approve a Bitcoin ETF is to take a huge risk of endorsing this crazy new thing that is explicitly anti-status quo and anti-banking system. And if it all falls apart and the SEC has approved it, they lose their jobs and their reputations are destroyed. If they don't approve it, a bunch of Bitcoiners get pissed, but they don't care about us, and they certainly don't care about retail investors. So
they
I don't
have
see that
approved
changing.
it to the extent that it's being held by publicly traded companies. Like I don't understand the distinction between the SEC saying, "Hey, look," and the first one I think was Fortress back in 2013, that actually in its public filings had Bitcoin on its balance sheet. And if the SEC thought that was a problem, like that was when they should have addressed it in public companies holding Bitcoin. And now
they don't have that authority. They don't have the authority to declare what a company can hold on its balance sheet.
They have the ultimate authority on accounting, right? And so if they want to say, hey, look, that's not even a real asset. You can't even hold that on you can't put that in your financial disclosures as being a real asset. You have to put it down as an expense, right? They could have taken that position.
Yeah, but then they're making an affirmative position, right? Which is always more risky for your career than just sitting back and not letting anything rock the boat.
That's
right?
totally fair. Yeah, and that's the same with GBTC, right? Like they don't have to make an affirmative decision with GBTC because of its structure. But ultimately, from a public policy perspective, like GBTC exists, it is huge, right? If it were to get wiped out and those $8 billion or how many $1 billion like disappeared, I don't see why people would not blame the SEC, right? They would be like, why didn't you stop GBTC from existing and taking that affirmative approach? So I don't know. I could see that, you know, the momentum is against an ETF, but they just need to do it.
I mean, my guess is GBTC will be the ETF. I mean, I think that's their goal. So, you know, I think that the ETF is great in terms of providing a vehicle that a lot of people can have access to, that a lot of infrastructure is already built out to, and allowing them to easily be able to get their Bitcoin exposure. Where I think the risk comes in is, Pierre, your scenario, your hyper Bitcoinization scenario, where, you know, you have a government that's dealing with a financial crisis. We already have a track record of them, you know, in a financial crisis, taking away assets from people as required, gold. And so between Coinbase and an ETF and Gemini and the US-based Bitcoin services, there's a pretty large amount of Bitcoin sitting in the United States and sitting in US jurisdiction. And, you know, you may have a mining network that, you know, gives $100 billion of security to your chain, but it doesn't protect you from a Black Hawk helicopter coming down, you know, people rappelling down from ropes at Coinbase.
Hold on. You said it's in the United States. I doubt it is. I bet you those keys are split up in multiple jurisdictions, right? And that establishes one of the principal advantages that Bitcoin has over gold, right? Gold has to have physical locality, physical presence. Bitcoin, you can split it up 20 different ways. You can have it on every continent. You can have it in Antarctica. So then you've got to pull together some international tribunal. You've got to get all of these lawyers together. Like I think that it's far more seizure resistant than what you're describing.
I mean, it definitely is more seizure resistant than gold, but you just have to arrest the principals, and you just have to go, Brian, you're going to jail for the rest of your life unless you do what we're telling you. I mean, if you're complying with SEC regulation to begin with, you're already under that regime. So, I mean, I don't see Barry Silbert, you know, saying cut off my fingers and no, it's just like he lives in the United States. He is captured in the U.S. fiefdom. And so, you know, it is more difficult, but people don't want to go to jail. I mean, Erik, what would you do if the police came and said, you know, shutting down Shapeshift and you need to hand over the Bitcoin or you're going to jail for the rest of your life and your team is going to jail?
We can't. It's non-custodial, which is the whole point. So,
okay. Sure. Okay. We have custodial. We're talking about custodial services. So, you know, when Coinbase goes not,
if it was custodial, yeah. No, I mean, people need to assume that anything that is custodial can suffer from the $5 wrench attack or the government coming in and fucking with your entire life attack.
I see it more likely that it would be actual criminals that do what you're describing than it be the actual government. Like,
what's the difference?
Right. Yeah. Fair. But I just think that it's far more likely that they're going to kidnap, you know, your family or whatever and ransom them that way than for it to be the United States federal government has seized the assets of GBTC.
That's true until there's a financial crisis in which Bitcoin is actually taking off and the dollar is falling apart. Then you're going to see some serious antagonism. And you're going to see things that are very similar to the 1933 gold confiscation order.
It's going to get toxic for sure.
And if you look at people from 1930, like what their moral standards were at that time versus today, dude, moral standards have not gone up since 1930. They've gone down. So if they're willing to take your gold in 1930, dude, they're willing to do way worse things today. I mean, it's like not even in the same
100%.
category.
Yeah, and people back then were more intelligent about money than they are today also, right? So the fact that the American public basically sat down and permitted confiscation of money, of gold from them, does not bode well for how the populace would treat it today. I think it'd be even easier for it to be done today. But thankfully we can hide it.
Jack, to your question, I think a non-custodial ETF would be fire. So, you know, when we could get the SEC to give a thumbs up on that, that would be really cool.
I don't think the SEC would permit anything like that.
Yeah.
No, they wouldn't. They wouldn't.
But you're right. It'd be dope.